All right, so welcome. So this is the Central Jersey DSA Political Education Committee. My name is William Silversmith, and we're going to be presenting a little talk called COVID Isn't Over, the State of the Pandemic and the Responsibilities of Socialists. So this talk I've been working on for quite some time, so hope you'll all appreciate it. When we're done, you can find ways to contact Central Jersey DSA here, how to join DSA if that's something you'd be interested in, and if you want to ask me questions after the talk, beyond on an ongoing basis, you can find me at Matrix Marxist on Twitter and ws13@protonmail.com, and you can follow my Medium for stuff anyway. But you probably won't care about that until after the talk. So. And I really wanted to thank Sudeep Bhattacharya in Central Jersey DSA for giving us the space to discuss this, because this is just such a critical topic, and we're in such a time of incredible reality warping denial on the state of the world and the pandemic, that simply getting people into the same room and talking about this is just, it's something that needs to happen. And just to, so some of you may or may not be familiar with what the DSA is. We're the Democratic Socialists of America. So I just wanted to give one slide. What is socialism? And so just to keep everyone informed and on the same page. So socialism is a theory that history is driven by the development of productive forces and class conflict. The idea that society can be run democratically in the interest of the working class, and there will be an end to class society. That liberal democracy is democracy for the rich, who are the owners of the said productive forces, sometimes called the means of production. And implementing a decent society will require a revolution. There's a reformist strand to socialism. I am not of that strand. And lastly, public health, literacy, and mutual aid in the interest of the working poor are topics that have long been very popular among all sorts of different socialists of all different tendencies. And disclosure, I am not a medical professional. I'm a software developer. I cannot give medical advice, but we'll be talking a lot about epidemiology. And I encourage you to always check the sources and look at use your brain to make your own judgments. And so here are some questions I'd like you to think about during the presentation. So remember any scientific questions you have for the end, and I'll do my very best to answer them. I don't know everything, so I won't be able to answer every question. But keep these questions in mind. Have socialists succeeded or failed on the pandemic? Why or why not? How can we hold safe and inclusive meetings? Do socialists have a responsibility to help manage the pandemic? What does it look like? What is the pandemic endgame? How can we get there? What are the weak points in the let it rip structure? How can we exploit these weak points? And in a somewhat Starship Troopers-esque fashion, would you like to know more? And because there's going to be a lot of charts and evidence and things like that in this presentation, I just want to very upfrontly highlight some of the central theses so they don't get lost. Firstly, COVID is airborne. Secondly, serial infection causes cumulative damage in long COVID. Infection is preventable. COVID is one of the top challenges facing the working class. Freedom, quote unquote, is locked down for the medically vulnerable, and the denial phase will not last forever. So why should you care? I mean, we've been in this is the third year of the pandemic. Why should you continue to care about this? And there are three general classes of reasons I've come up with. There are selfish reasons, unselfish reasons, and strategic reasons. The first is you won't get sick or die if you perform the appropriate mitigations, especially if you're immunocompromised. You'll keep your job and your employability if you don't get long COVID. It'll keep grandma and Pep alive. Those are all great reasons in my book. unselfish reasons, we prevent mass suffering. We have solidarity with the working class. We have solidarity with the medically vulnerable. The working class is core to socialist theories of change. And medically vulnerable are also victims of capitalism and often workers themselves. So those are great groups to keep in mind. Strategic reasons. One of the main reasons for the Starbucks unionization drive was COVID safety. I don't know all the reasons they were doing it. Some of it was scheduling, but I remember hearing one of their organizers talk on an interview, and they very prominently highlighted the fact that Starbucks was throwing them under the bus on COVID. And just generally speaking, like maintaining the health of the left will on its own grant future advantages for decades. Like if our organizers and leadership get sick, we're going to fail in our mission. So we need to stay healthy. So COVID medicine responses. I just wanted to very briefly up front also dispense with several myths and give a response to each of them. So the first myth, this is the exit wave. Welcome to the 8th exit wave. I don't think we're going to be exiting anytime soon. Novelty is severity. So this is the idea that just because COVID is new to your immune system, that's why it causes such a severe reaction. Well, it turns out that reinfections can kill you. It's fewer than the first infection, but that indicates that this is an intrinsically pathogenic disease. Myth, masks don't work. N95 respirators work. Surgical masks work, and only when everyone uses them correctly and consistently. Infection is inevitable. Minimizing lifetime cases is the key metric. There are effective mitigations to entirely prevent or delay infection. And delayed infection means that you're going longer between infections. So all good stuff. Next, that's the myth. We're starting to lose those tools because we're allowing the virus to mutate by infecting so many people and become resistant to our tools. Myth, kids are fine with COVID. Response, some kids die, often from multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, Miss C particularly. Kids can get long COVID, and I don't know why we have to say this, but kids shouldn't die or be disabled. It seems a little obvious to me. Myth, COVID is just the flu. Response, COVID is more transmissible, more deadly, and more damaging than the flu, even with the vaccines. And myth, we can live with the virus. Response, we can live like penicillin was just discovered and not very available. And it might be worse than that due to cumulative damage. Myth, vaccines kill more than COVID. Response, a controlled dose of part of a virus is not worse than an uncontrolled infection with a fully operational virus. It seems a little obvious, but I don't know why it needs to be said. Myth, we only need to watch for hospitalizations and deaths. Response, we also need to watch for long COVID. And we're going to have a big section on that. So a question you may be asking yourself is, why is COVID different? So I've come up with a slide that explains this. It's more deadly. It has a 5 to 10 times higher death rate than flu. It's damaging. Frequently, there are new health problems that are exhibited after acute recovery. It's fast. It's much higher transmission than cold or flu. It's repetitive. It's able to reinfect multiple times a year. It's difficult. It strains public health infrastructure, requiring annoying mitigations. It's economically damaging. It strikes at the heart of capitalism. The denial. Authorities appear to be encouraging people to get infected. And this one is more tentative. So I put a question mark on it. Does it damage immunity? There are open questions about this, lots of interesting science papers. And it's something to keep in mind that this is a possibility. And maybe in a future talk, we can dive into some of those papers and look at whether this is a thing that we should really be worried about. And, could it be worse? Yeah, it could always be worse, right? It could be, we could be in the middle of the bubonic plague that killed like, was it like 1/3 or 2/3 of like Europe's population? I think it was 1/3. But we have a modern industrial society, and it's really hard to operate under conditions of excessive disease. So I want to give a little bit of historical context for how bad this is. So without even the concept of reinfections, just like first infections, we are seeing 1945 mortality levels in 2022. And so this first figure on the left is a graph that I got from a 1999 CDC report from their morbidity and mortality weekly report. And this was a very triumphant report. They were showing how much public health had done to drive down the rate of infectious disease in the United States between 1900 and 1996. And you could see at the very beginning, all the way in 1900, we had 800 per 100,000 deaths per year. And as public health measures were implemented, the first continuous municipal use of chlorine in water started to drop this down. And then there was the 1918 influenza pandemic, and that popped things up to almost around 900 per 100,000 per year. Once that pandemic ended, we had this almost straight line decline. Last human-to-human transmission of plague, first use of penicillin, Salk vaccine introduced, passage of the Vaccination Assistance Act. They kept driving it down and driving it down and driving it down until about 1980. That's when AIDS started to become more prevalent, and we didn't have like good therapeutics for it. So you saw the disease level start to rise a little bit. But I think after this chart, because this is kind of an old chart, that level starts to drop a little bit again because we have much better treatments for AIDS now and HIV. And to put this in context, I just want to show you the crude death rates in Q4 2021 for COVID-19. So that's 125 people per 100,000 die. The next highest is in their infectious diseases is influenza and pneumonia at 12.7%, 12.7 people per 100,000. So if you can see my pointer, we go back, I'm going to assume we're back at like around 1980 levels of infectious disease. If you add 100 points to that, right? 120 points to that, we go back until we touch the line, 1945. So this is like right after penicillin was discovered and not used, everywhere. So that's where we are right now. So now we're really getting into the meat of the presentation. So the pandemic is not over. So despite Joe Biden claiming the pandemic is over a few weeks ago, you could see in the CDC's own chart from October 19th that there's high transmission almost everywhere in the country except for most of Florida. And we don't even know who's reporting things appropriately. People aren't getting tested. So very likely the actual level of transmission is much, much higher than is being reported here. And so one good barometer of that is wastewater surveillance. So you can see percentage of sites in each category. So basically the CDC goes to different sewer plants and like samples the water so they can like just check what the relative level of SARS DNA in it is. And so when that quantity starts to rise, you know that there are infections spreading, and usually this leads cases. So you have like a independent measurement regardless of whether people are testing. And you can see that as the fall is starting, we're starting to see an upward trend in the number of sites with a large increase in COVID cases. And that happened last year too. You saw like around the same time, we started to see an increase in the wastewater. And because this is the New Jersey Democratic Socialists, we want to just check out some New Jersey stats. The New Jersey test positivity rate, since we have like such little testing today compared to where we were like last year or even 10 months ago, you could see the test positivity rate is something that you kind of have to squint at because it doesn't, because you're not catching all the cases. You just need to kind of estimate prevalence. And here you can see that our current positivity rate in, I guess, the end of September is about where we were during the Delta wave. So that wasn't a very pretty thing that happened back last fall either. So you could see that the number of tests have declined very precipitously, even compared to where they were last year. So the tests, because there's so few tests, the positivity rate may be somewhat inflated because only symptomatic people are being tested, but it's not a great looking indicator, you know? New Jersey COVID hospitalizations. So these are the increased hospitalizations due solely to COVID. Here you can see the ticks on the x-axis here are every 6 months. And you can see the y-axis is hospitalizations. So you can see here we're in 2020, a lot of hospitalizations, they kind of collapsed here. Moving into winter 2021, which I like to call the winter of death. We had a lot of cases and there was like sort of a double hump there. These are solely people being hospitalized. Then you have the Delta wave. Omicron had almost as high as the first wave. And we're coming down. And now it seems to be just sort of a steadily increasing base load. And it's going up. To get sort of a national perspective on this, it's always good to look at excess deaths. So excess deaths are total deaths in the United States compared to the expected number of deaths from prior years. So this sort of like gives you an idea, because maybe, you know, it's hard to hide a body. So generally like death counts are pretty accurate. So it's a good barometer for when things are getting a little bit out of kilter. And I think the CDC in this chart is still using the baseline from 2019. So here you can see, here's where we were. There was a little flu season over here at the very beginning in 2018. And then here we are 2019, we had like a normal flu season getting into 2020. And then all of a sudden, we have a lot of excess deaths over here that indicated by those plus signs. And then after, looks like as we got into spring, things normalized a little bit. There was like a little bit of excess, but not too much. And then once fall started, we started to get quite a lot of excess deaths. And heading into the Omicron wave, we were really back to where we were in January 2021. And then we're coming back down here. It's a 2022. It's been more chill than 2020, as you could see over here. That was higher, but it's also been higher than 2021. So as we're heading into the fall here, is it going to look like this again? I don't know. We do have some more immune evasive variants coming along, but we do have more vaccinations. We have more, in theory, post-infection immunity. So we'll see what happens there. And just politically, I'd like to point out that, so we have about 1.07 million confirmed deaths due to COVID-19. So this is like not the excess deaths. This is just straight up, we know they died from COVID-19. And there's some interesting things to notice about this chart. So one, President Trump, I like to imagine Trump and Biden sort of like in a clock tower, doing like a little FPS. They're getting some kills, And President Trump managed to kill 411,000 people. But President Biden has been in the clock tower a little bit longer. And he's also been like, about an equally good shot. So he's killed about 659,000 people, So, and another really interesting trend to notice in this chart is if you just trace it from March 2020, it basically is a straight line through both the Trump and Biden administration until we get to about the spring 2022, and then it sort of tapers off a little bit. So, just looking at the number of confirmed deaths, they basically have had the same policy trajectory. They're exactly the same guy. I really fucking hate them. So let's go to the next slide. So here we're looking at JHU. We're looking at the inpatient capacity, national inpatient capacity statistics for the United States. And here you can see the blue-green bars are non-COVID patients that are occupied, beds that are occupied. Orange are COVID inpatient beds that are occupied, and the gray is theoretically inpatient beds that are unoccupied. And so you can see here in 3 distinct areas that they sort of managed to hold the line in terms of the total number of patients that are in the hospital system, although it is rising before January 2021. And you can see these 3 clear cases of what appear to be large-scale care rationing. So that means there were a number of patients that didn't have COVID that got denied seats just because the hospital system was in fact overwhelmed. And so this was often non-emergency care, like elective surgeries got to be moved, but delaying care is never a good thing, even if it's like elective. That could mean that you have like a cancer that it doesn't need to be removed today, but you can move it to next week, right? So, and so it also, if you look at the overall system capacity, you can see that we were adding beds up until about January 2021. And then there's been like this slow decline in the number of beds. And it's kind of difficult just from this chart to tell if this is due to sort of like, oh, they think they have a handle on COVID, and so now they're sort of right sizing the system, or if there's sort of like this physician and nurse burnout. Particularly, I was informed that because nurses are unionized, they have like a maximum number of patients that they can care for. And so if nurses quit, then the hospital, like due to the contracts it has to reduce the number of beds that are counted as staffed. For physicians, because they're not unionized, they can just be assigned more patients. So even if there's only like one or like a few doctors in the hospital, they can just assign more and more patients. I don't know what the actual cap on that would be. It's probably something that's crazy. And there's this little dip at the end that I suspect is reporting lag, but it could be accelerating burnout. I don't know. It's probably reporting lag though. And so the pandemic isn't ending. If we look at the CDC Nowcast, so we could see that there's all these different variant proportions that are being presented. So this sort of tracks which variants are the most prevalent at a given point in time. And we could see starting in July here, it's been a BA5 party for a very long time. BA 4.6 started to edge into that, but then very recently, we started to see BQ.1, BQ1.1, and BF5 start to become much more prevalent. And so they are taking up an increasing quantity of the variant proportion. And there was a recent preprint that showed that these are, and we'll go into some of the consequences of that on the next slide. So the Biden administration likes to claim that we have the tools to manage the pandemic, but unfortunately, the tools are getting picked off. And if you click that link, there's like a nice article about this. But I made this little table of some of the different tools we have to deal with COVID-19 in the hospital. And so you can see Casavaviramab and Imdamivimab, which comprise RegenCov. Those are monoclonal antibodies. Omicron has defeated them. Same with Bamlanivimab and Estezivimab, Strovimab. So all 3 of those treatments have been basically defeated. Tocilizumab is an immune modulator. since it's also made of antibodies, but it targets human proteins, so the virus can't evade that. Betalovimab is monoclonal antibodies that have been used against Omicron. Unfortunately, a recent preprint has shown that Omicron BR2, CA1, BQ1.1, BM1.1.1, and especially XBB, which is prevalent in Singapore and is rising in prevalence in India, has exhibited extremely high evasion to betalovimab. Evusheld, which is prophylactic monoclonal antibodies for immunocompromised people. So this is allowing a lot of immunocompromised people to continue to live their lives normally as possible during the pandemic. These are also subjected to very high evasion by those same variants. Remdesivir is an antiviral agent that you may have heard of. I rated this one as at risk, not because there are any currently circulating resistant variants, but there is a preprint out there that found resistant variants in some that were non-transmissible in some patients, like when they did certain biopsies and things like that. So that means it's, the potential for a remdesivir resistant variant to appear is, substantial. Ritonavir boosted nirmatrelvir, which is Paxlovid commercially, as an antiviral. That's still okay. It's a protease inhibitor. There are many contraindications for it, so not everybody can take it. And if we continue to use it without controlling the variants, there's a strong potential for it to be defeated as well. Dexamethasone is a steroid. That's fine. It targets human proteins. And vaccination is a prophylactic that we're very familiar with. The variants in waning are reducing efficacy of the vaccines. And so just to highlight that, I wanted to show that the CDC's Mortality and Morbidity Weekly Report recently came out with a new study that showed waning efficacy of the vaccines. So here you could see we have the vaccines versus BA1 and BA2, which were like the first and second versions of Omicron, and then the BA4, BA5 period, which is the current iteration of Omicron. And here I've highlighted in red that, for people with 2 doses, after 150 days, the adjusted vaccine efficacy fell to 34%. These are supposed to be pretty high before, but against Omicron, it's not doing as good. For 3 doses, it does pretty good for about 120 days, 80%, but then it falls to 41% after 120 days. For the BA4 or 5, which you see kind of a similar pattern. 2 doses for 150 days, you're at 83%, and then it's falling down to 37%. For 3 doses, we're getting down to 29%. And so because these confidence intervals, you can see like 12 to 55, 3 to 48 are like very wide here. I don't want you to sort of get the impression that like 3 doses makes it worse than 2 doses. It's just that this is kind of a messy study. And so it's probably more that they're like equal or something like that. But the numbers just didn't come out very nicely. Sorry. So one sort of concept that has been sort of toyed with, and so the FDA put out a new bivalent vaccine that has the both the wild type and the current Omicron BA5 spike in it, which I got. And the idea is sort of to better match whatever the circulating spike is to get better efficacy against, death, hospitalization, and transmission. Unfortunately, there's a recent preprint that came out. I haven't really read it, but I read the abstract. It says that the new bivalent isn't better than just the regular monovalent that we've been using. So that's great news. One other thing you can get from this chart is that reboosting temporarily restores efficacy. As you can see, like for 7 to 20 days after getting the third shot, your efficacy goes back up, down from 37 to like 60 or whatever. So, it's the vaccine is very important and everyone should get it, but it's not the only tool in the toolbox. And by relying on it, we're really damaging it by over relying on it. So, another thing I wanted to point out is Omicron is not mild. This was endlessly circulated in the press that Omicron is mild. This is like the vaccine strain. This is like the exit wave, which we now know to be false. So Omicron is very interesting because there were some interesting biological changes to it where it started using like a different cellular entry mechanism or preferencing a different cellular entry mechanism. But this preprint here that came out a little while back, SARS-CoV-2 Omicron variant is as deadly as previous waves, note, after adjusting for vaccinations, demographics, and comorbidities. So Omicron is basically as intrinsically deadly as some of the other variants that we've seen. However, we experienced it and its much higher intrinsic transmissibility and immune evasion compared to other variants in a period where more people had the vaccine and more people already were exposed to previous variants. So you can see that happened. So here we have, let's see, newly confirmed COVID-19. So here we have cases, right? So we have limited or no vaccines, and that corresponds to a very high death toll. As we move forward into the future, we see Omicron had a very sharp peak that was just astoundingly high that I like to think of as like the wave from the water planet in Interstellar. And that resulted in, it didn't result in a peak as high as the other ones, but the level of death, according to this paper, due primarily to who it infected and their level of immunity, it was about as high as the first wave. So that's something to keep in mind. And so now we're getting to the point I think is really like the core of this talk, which is talking about the legacy that reinfections will leave. So reinfections are not mild. So here is a study, outcomes of SARS-CoV-2 reinfection. And they looked at outcomes at 6 months versus uninfected controls for 1, 2, and 3 or more infections. So it's probably safe to say that each infection incurs cumulative damage. And so let's look at this figure they gave us here. So here, I just want to point out before we look at the figure that the scale bars that they used are like a little bit wonky. I'm not sure if it's a logarithmic scale, but it's a little bit distorted. So just keep that in mind. Make sure to look at the scale bar as we go through this. So first, we have hospitalization, right? First infection looks like you are a little more likely than the uninfected controls to go to the hospital. And then second infection, you're much more likely, 6 times more likely. And then third infection, almost 12 times more likely, like 10 to 12, depending on how you look at these confidence intervals. At least one sequela, meaning like one new problem. You start off a little bit more likely, like maybe like 1.5 or 1.2. Now we're at 2, and then we're at 3. Cardiovascular, similar story. Start out at 1.5 or so. Now we're at 3. Now we're at 5 times more likely. Coagulation and hematologic, another straight line. Diabetes, new onset diabetes, another straight line. Fatigue, another straight line. Gastrointestinal, another straight line. Kidney, another mostly straight line. Mental health, another straight line. Musculoskeletal, another straight line. Neurologic, another straight line. Pulmonary, a pretty wild straight line. Like you're almost like, it looks like 10, I'm going to guess like 8 to 10 times more likely on the third infection to have pulmonary symptoms. So that's pretty dire. One sec, just gonna take a sip. So what is long COVID? It's also known as post-acute sequelae to COVID-19 or PASC. That's what's known as in UK papers. It's also known as long haul COVID, although usually it's abbreviated to long COVID these days. So I'm just going to sort of give you a general definition here because it varies so much, but it's at least one new persistent problem that occurs within some time window from acute infection that can't be traced to an obvious source. And the precise definitions vary from study to study because each study is looking at different time windows. They're looking at different symptoms, different organ systems. So there just hasn't been a comprehensive definition given yet. And one of the reasons for that is that the number of types of problems is very large, affecting most organ systems, although there are commonalities in some of the most frequent systems. These symptoms can be annoying, limiting of daily activities, or severely disabling. Some people recover, although it's unknown which kinds of problems recover best and what the time frame is. Some people that have recovered reacquire long COVID after a reinfection, and few to no treatments are available depending on the symptoms. So here are some of the presentations of long COVID that you may or may not be familiar with. I just wrote a bunch of them down. They're not sorted by severity or frequency or anything like that. So I'll just read them really quickly. There's brain fog or cognitive decline, which I wrote about in a previous article in Cosmonaut. There's brain imaging anomalies. You can see structural shrinkage sometimes in like MRI. Diffuse and tensor imaging can sometimes show diffuse damage that's widespread. PET scan or positron emission tomography can show hypometabolism in certain areas of the brain, meaning that your brain isn't processing sugar and energy appropriately. So that means it's not functioning as quickly. Chronic fatigue, new onset diabetes, cardiac imaging anomalies. So this is most frequently detected when a very sensitive test called NMR, or I think it's nuclear magnetic resonance. I forget, but it's basically an MRI for your heart. And it will often find subtle anomalies in even healthy people, previously healthy people. Cardiovascular events and strokes are up, loss of taste and smell, decline in kidney function, new onset anxiety disorders. Some of those may be related to the next point, which is called dysregulated autonomic nervous system. So that's when your body is no longer correctly compensating automatically for the various changes in how your body position, time of day, things like that. So some people, there are many manifestations of this. Some people experience this as a syndrome called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I think that's what it's called. And that's when you stand up or sit down or something like that, but usually standing. Your heart rate will not compensate correctly for your new body position. And your heart will be beating either too fast or too slow, and you'll get like dizzy and potentially fall or something like that. Some people may experience new onset anxiety disorders due to this, some fraction of them at least, because if your heart rate is not controlled, your blood pressure is not appropriately controlled, this can simulate the symptoms of a panic attack, because that's when your body you get vasodilation or constriction, I'm not sure, and your heart starts beating too fast. And so if you're not, you can reinterpret this incorrectly and think you're having a panic attack. Digestive issues such as GERD are also possible because there's sometimes persistent gut infections of COVID-19. So let's get into long COVID prevalence. So how often does this occur to people? And I think you're going to want to pay very careful attention to the next several slides because it's very sobering stuff. So when I was researching my paper, my article on long COVID in the brain due to viral infection, I read a lot of different papers. And so there's different ways people estimate long COVID. But when people went to a doctor and were evaluated in a clinical setting, generally their estimates seem to center around 20%. And sometimes that would be plus or minus a bunch, like maybe like plus or minus 10. But somewhere around 20% was a common figure. In a study of insurance claims in mid 2021, they saw that 19% of asymptomatic people, 27.5% of symptomatic people, and 50% of hospitalized people came down with long COVID. So the more severe the infection, the worse the more likely long COVID. So in mid 2022, the CDC and the Census Bureau conducted the Household Pulse Survey. And so these are like, I'm not sure if they're internet or telephone questions, but these are just survey questions that were asked to people somewhat randomly. And so it's not their highest quality type of study, but it's just to get sort of a pulse, and they'll do a more careful study later. So here are the results. I assume after adjusting for demographics and things like that, have you ever had long COVID? 14% of all adults surveyed. And it was more common among women than it was among men, but both groups were getting it pretty bad. So 18% of women and 11% of men. Currently has long COVID, 7.2% of all adults. So that's, it kind of looks like there's some recovery there, but there's still a shocking amount of long COVID in all adults. Any limitations on daily living? 5.9% of all adults. That is 80-ish% of long COVID sufferers have a limitation on daily living. And significant limitations on daily living, probably meaning you're severely disabled, unable to go to work or something like that. 1.8% of all adults, or 25% of long COVID sufferers. So you might be wondering, do vaccines protect against long COVID when you have a breakthrough infection or a BTI? So I found two studies, one of which is more pessimistic and one of which is more optimistic. And so this January to October 2021 cohort of veterans, their BTI hazard ratio, meaning how much more likely they are to have long COVID than an unvaccinated person, was 0.85, meaning it did help a little bit, but it was only about 15%. So that would only be like something like a 4% less chance of getting long COVID. So a large 2020 to 2021 cohort study using the TriNet X platform, they found a much more optimistic BTI reduced risk of 2 to 5x, depending on the symptom, versus unvaccinated. So that's a lot more optimistic. But even, you got to remember, if your baseline risk is 20% and you're 5 times less likely to get it, that's still 4%, which is extremely high, because if we just allow COVID to rip and 1 million people get it, right? 4% times 1 million is still 40,000 people. That's quite a lot. And over time, we're going to keep infecting them and infecting them and infecting them. However, you should note that vaccines also partially prevent infection. So they're not perfect, but they do, at least assuming the variants don't get the better of them, they do partially prevent infection. So they do better than these numbers overall, because these numbers are for when you get a breakthrough infection. So here's the Bank of England workforce study. So the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, many of our brightest think tanks are very interested in long COVID because they want to know how it will affect the economy. So the Bank of England here has two very interesting figures. I took this from, if you read the article that I posted, I used them there. So figure 6, UK, percent of the adult population aged 16 to 64 who are outside of the workforce and do not want a job because of long-term sickness. And so we can see here that in 1990, long decline in the amount of people that were outside the workforce because they were too sick to work. And that started to reverse around 2013. And it also split between men and women, with it looks like men being slightly better off and women, slightly more women being disabled, with like a little spike here. I don't really know the reason why. And it started to climb up after that. And then when we get to 2020, it really takes off. It gets really bad there. So let's look at figure 5, UK workforce, millions of people. So this is the total size of the UK workforce. So the colors here are different. They don't refer to men and women, or so just be careful about that. So here we have they expected the workforce to be rising, and they expected it to continue to rise. In 2020, it was supposed to be about, a little more than 34 million people. It was supposed to rise to almost 35 million people by 2022. But in actuality, it collapsed. It started falling, and it resulted in this big gap between what they expected and what we actually have. Now, in the United States, there was a Federal Reserve study. They're also, as you imagine, quite interested in this stuff. Let me just open the window. It's getting a little warm in here. Sorry about that. So the US Federal Reserve study looked at, so let's look at figure 2 here, the physical and cognitive impairments associated with long COVID. And so here we can look at the different symptoms that they were focusing on. So remembering or concentrating, walking or climbing stairs, self-care, dressing or bathing. So these are just very basic things that you expect a healthy adult to be able to do. And here you can see that people who currently have long COVID, over 60% of them, some of them, so that the lighter bars are some limitation, and the solid bars are, the darker bars are a significant limitation. The 60% have some limitation, and about almost, like, I guess that's about 18% or so have a significant limitation. So they're having a lot of trouble remembering or concentrating. And then I'm a little skeptical about that 6 or 7% gap between recovered and current in the household pulse survey, because I look at this next bar and it says previously had long COVID. And that, even though it's reduced, we're still looking at like 45% of them have some limitation, and 8 or almost 10% have a significant problem. And that's a lot higher than the baseline for never had long COVID. And we look at we see the same pattern for walking or climbing stairs. There's just a tremendous number of people that have new issues, and the recovery is just incomplete. It looks like about half of the people who claim they're recovered are actually recovered, and according to this metric. And just dressing or bathing, pretty significant quantities. It's not looking too good.
Well,
Let's look at figure 5.
I'm going to give you the 10-minute warning.
Oh, wow. Okay. So the second part of my talk is about transmission and how to prevent it. Let me just finish the long COVID part, and then maybe we'll have that part for next time or something like that. So let's just finish the long COVID part. So figure 5, non-participation due to disability, illness, or inability to work. We can see that that has been falling since 2017, and then it flatlines starting in 2020. And we can see the difference between no college degree and college graduates. No college degree starts at a much higher baseline of disability, but both are rising. It looks like the non-college degree is rising a little bit more sharply, but they're both getting there. So the Brookings Institute, which is a neoliberal think tank, nonetheless, they do have like one person there. Her name is Kitty Bosch, who appears to be looking at long COVID prevalence in the United States. And her estimate in February was that there were about 1.6 million full-time workers are out of the workforce due to long COVID, which would account for 15% of all unfilled jobs. So 1.1 million potentially out of work, and 0.5 million due to reducing hours. And then when we look at August 2022, she updated her estimate. Now she had access to the Fed report. I'm not sure what the Tuck report is, and the Lancet report, which is a British medical journal. So apparently there were studies there that showed the full-time equivalent workers out of the labor force due to long COVID ranged between 1.8 million to 4.1 million. Working age Americans with long COVID who are likely in the labor force pre-illness, 12.2 million. And working age Americans who have long COVID today, 16.3 million. So this is a highly, highly prevalent, and it's really going to start affecting the economy. Brookings study of Latino households in Chicago. So when I dug into some of the CDC statistics, more Latino households said that they had ever had COVID than any other demographic when broken down by race and ethnicity. So I could sort of see why they're looking at Latinos as sort of like a bellwether in Chicago. So they're looking at this one community in one city, and they're asking, are you or any of your children experiencing challenges from long COVID-19 symptoms? And so about 25% of these households said yes. 11% said, I am suffering. 9% said, yes, my child is experiencing symptoms, but not me. And 5%, yes, I and my children are both experiencing symptoms. So that's a little bit higher than what other demographics are experiencing, but we're all going to be there if we keep getting infected, in my opinion. Figure 2, have any of the following been challenges for you due to long-term COVID? So of these people that these households had, what is this done to them? I have depleted my savings to pay for healthcare costs, 36%. I have lost wages because of missing work, 33%. My quality of life has decreased. I'm depressed, 28%. I'm in danger of losing my job because of missed work, 24%. I have lost my job, 22%. I cannot exercise as much as I used to, 21%. And my child has not been able to participate in early childhood programming or sports, 9%. So maybe I'll just have enough time to talk about some aspects of the long-term evolution of COVID. So the virus itself has been evolving. Omicron no longer means one strain. They just basically stopped assigning Greek letters based on whatever the currently circulating variant is. As you can see, so this chart sort of shows as you sort of move radially out, there are more mutations in this strain. And you could sort of look at it phylogenetically, meaning there's like a tree of descendants here. And here you could see, some of these strains had sort of a short phylogeny. There's alpha, you see like the various alpha mutants that are grouped together, eta, mu, iota, epsilon. You haven't even heard of some of these, I bet. There's the beta variant that was prevalent in South Africa at one point and a few other places, kappa. And then the Delta variant basically clobbered all of those. And it had quite a few mutations. And what's sort of interesting here is we get over to Omicron, it has many, many more mutations than all the rest of them. And very interestingly, it comes from a much shorter branch of the phylogenetic tree. So it is much closer, or at least the original set of mutations were much closer to the wild type variant than Delta. So Delta came out of this stuff. Omicron came out of nowhere, okay? And so what drives long-term viral evolution? There are a lot of different elements, but here are
you're at 5 or 4 minutes. Just so you know.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so long-term viral evolution. The number of infections drives evolution by providing more opportunities to mutate. So when we have more infections total, it's not the vaccines, it's having infections. It provides the raw material for provides the raw material for evolution and mutation by just having more copies being made. More copies can have more errors introduced. Those copies can recombine with similar strains of or even different viruses. And another really interesting point is immunocompromised infected produced more variation per infection because they have longer infections. They can't fight the infection if they have a persistent infection, and that drives much more evolution. In fact, I forgot to look for the citation here, but the Omicron family is sort of suspected to have developed from a chronic mutation because novo out of nowhere, even though it leaped backwards in the evolutionary tree when the Delta variant was the most widespread. So that was pretty wild. So, and I found this interesting paper called the total number and mass of SARS-CoV-2 virions that estimated that every infection probably explores every single point mutation in the viral genome. So that's a lot of raw material for evolution, right? Not all of those mutants are going to even make it out of the body. They're not going to even infect another cell or anything like that. But and there's like a lot of dud virions that get produced that are just non-functional. But if you're exploring, everything every time somebody catches this thing, that's it's not good. And so what I want you to take away, the key takeaways here are there's a virtuous circle. So if you control transmission, you reduce the number of cases, you make your entire job easier because you have fewer variants being produced and you have fewer cases to manage. It's wonderful. On the other hand, you can have a vicious circle. You can have uncontrolled transmission, which is what we have right now, which makes future control harder because it causes proliferation of just an incredible soup of different variants. It's a lot harder to tailor therapies when you don't know which variant you're tailoring them to. As you can see, we're losing some of our tools. And lastly, protecting the immunocompromised yields disproportionate benefits for everyone. So I'm not saying like lock away immunocompromised people. That's the last thing I want to do. But what I am saying is that if we all protect each other and by proxy protect the immunocompromised, that will yield disproportionate benefits. And so I think this is the most important thing. So I think if you'll grant me just a few extra minutes, I want you to watch this video. And if you'll grant me more time after that, I would have you watch another video, but that's up to you guys. But so let me just have you watch this video because this is the most important thing to take away from the entire talk.
Right now, a deadly virus is in the air. It spreads like smoke when we talk. It spreads when we cough, when we sing. Even breathing quietly is enough to spread it. And just like smoke, the virus hangs around for hours. But it takes just seconds to breathe enough to get infected. Don't breathe it in. Wear a respirator whenever you're sharing air. Not one of those leaky surgical masks. Use a proper one, rated at least N95 or FFP2. This will stop you getting sick. Don't breathe it in. Open windows. Get the virus out and get fresh air in. Wear a respirator. Get fresh air.
Yeah, so I guess I will have to stop here and we could start having a discussion. Yeah, there's a lot more slides with a lot of interesting material, but I just don't think we'll be able to get to them today.